Good morning. Welcome to St. Peter's Hove. I'm Father Alexander, and this is our 180th step in our walking tour through the Bible. We're still in the book of Psalms, but we're on Psalm 94 brackets 95, the invitatory psalm, the psalm that's used every day to kick off the divine office. Now, the invitatory psalm means the psalm of invitation, and it starts off, "Come, bring out our joy to the Lord, hail the God who saves us. Let us come before him giving thanks. With songs, let us hail the Lord. A mighty God is the Lord, a great king above all gods. In his hands are the depths of the earth, the heights of the mountains are his. To him belongs the sea, for he made it, and the dry land shaped by his hands. Come in, let us bow and bend low. Let us kneel before the God who made us, for he is our God, and we, the people who belong to his pasture, the flock that is led by his hand. Oh, that today you would listen to his voice. Harden not your hearts as at Meribah, as on that day at Massah in the desert, when your fathers put me to the test, when they tried me, though they saw my work. For 40 years I was wearied of these people, and I said, their hearts are astray. These people do not know my ways. Then I took an oath in my anger, never shall they enter my rest. A rather dramatic psalm. Now, we say it every day, so maybe the drama's worn off a bit. But this terrible warning, God has said, you'll never get into the promised land. And indeed, their bodies littered the desert. They didn't get into the promised land. Their children got into the promised land. The other thing about this is we forget, maybe, or in danger of forgetting, the actual circumstances for when this psalm was first used. First, come, and then come in. This is the psalm of procession, people processing into the temple. As we know, people from all over the world, faithful Israelites, and all over Israel and Galilee would go to the temple. They would make the ascent to the temple. Jerusalem's high up on top of a mountain. So they would go to a temple, the temple, not our temple, the one and only temple where God lived. And as they got ready to enter the temple after perhaps a very long journey, they would recite this psalm. That's the obvious conclusion one makes from reading it. Come, ring out our joy to the Lord. Let us rejoice because here we are on the threshold of the temple. Let us hail the God who saves us. Let us come before him, giving thanks for our long journey finally over. With songs, let us hail the Lord. And songs are things of joy. So we are standing at the threshold of God. We are going to go into the presence of God. Let us come before him. He is present in the temple. And then, of course, it says, well, God is everywhere. A mighty God is the Lord, a great king above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, the heights of the mountains are his. So the very top of the world belongs to him, the very bottom of the world belongs to him. Even the sea, and the Israelites were notorious for not going to sea, even the sea belongs to him. And indeed, the land belongs to him. So west, east, north, south, up, down, all of this is God's. And yet, God is particularly in this temple. God is everywhere. People often say, oh, I don't need to go to church. God is everywhere. Yeah, right. Okay, love. You're not the first person to say that. God is everywhere. But he's particularly in the church, in the temple. He particularly wants to meet you in the temple. That's why the Israelites made this tremendous journey as often as they could to the temple. That's why entering the temple is a moment of great joy and great revelation. Come in, let us bow and bend low, because God is here. We let us genuflect. Let us kneel before the God who made us, for he is our God, and we, the people who belong to his pasture, the flock that is led by his hand. So a little reference there to the Psalm of the Good Shepherd, for example, and the fact that we are a flock, people who stick together. We are a flock, we are a congregation because God has called us to be a congregation. So the going into the temple is not just going into the presence of God, it's also a moment where we feel our identity as the people of God, when we feel close to those who are around us. Now something very strange happens. This going into the temple and into the presence of God, this being part of the people of God, called to be in his presence, sparks off some ancestral memory. Oh, that today, says God, says the psalmist, that you would listen to his voice. Harden not your hearts as Meribah, as on that day at Massah in the desert. In other words, you, going into the temple now, do not be like your ancestors who walked through the desert for 40 years and never arrived. So the journey into the temple is in parallel to the journey to the promised land, from Egypt to the promised land. That journey did not end altogether well. It ended with the Israelites in the promised land and taking possession of the promised land. But the original Israelites who left Egypt never saw it into the promised land at all, apart from, I think, Joshua, the son of Nun. But even Moses didn't get into the promised land. He just saw it from a distance because they had sinned at Massah and Meribah, which we talked about months ago, I think. Now, as you cross the threshold of your temple, your parish church or the Jewish temple, you need to be aware that there is much about you that is unconverted. And you need to be aware that you are on a pilgrimage to the temple. Even going to Sunday Mass is a pilgrimage. And for the Jews, certainly going out to the temple was a great pilgrimage. You're on a pilgrimage, and that pilgrimage may not end well unless you listen to the voice of the Lord. That pilgrimage is ongoing. Our ancestors walked through the desert. We were present in our ancestors, if you like. Our ancestors in faith were walking through the desert. But we're no longer walking through the desert. But the same things, the same challenges that our ancestors faced, we too face. We want to put God to the test. Our hearts are astray in many ways. We do not know his ways. These people do not know my ways, says God. We don't know his ways. There is much about us that still needs to be converted. And God may well take an oath in his anger, never shall they enter my rest. In other words, this lot are not going to the rest that is heaven. They're going down to purgatory or somewhere else far worse than purgatory. So, in other words, life is a constant pilgrimage, and the point of the pilgrimage is to leave behind the things that block us from communing with God, is to throw overboard all that is not needed on the voyage or not wanted on the voyage. Or, as the Blessed Carlo Acutis says, for a balloon to rise, you have to throw the weights overboard. And we too need to throw overboard all the weights that are holding us to the earth so that we may rise to heaven. And don't forget, the best way of doing that is by going to confession, where we put aside, or we make at least an effort to put aside, or we make a declaration that we will put aside all the things that block us from being truly the children of God, all the things that hold us back, all the weights that hold us down. Now, the fact that this psalm is used every day in the liturgy, and it's the only psalm that's used every day, although there are alternatives, but most people stick with this one, is a sign to us that conversion is a daily experience. Every time we go into church, it's like we're going into church for the first time. We are entering the house of God, and we are making a new commitment to be his people more perfectly, more fully than before. Come in, let us bow and bend low. Let us kneel before the God who made us. For he is our God, and we, the people who belong to his pasture, the flock that is led by his hand. Every time we go into church, we are renewing our commitment to be the people of God. And incidentally, we do that all the time by getting your finger, sticking it in the holy water and going like this, because that is a reminder of your baptism when you first became a child of God. And you do it every time you go into church. You don't do it on the way out, by the way. You do it on the way in. Now, I think this is a very important psalm because it's about faith. It's about adherence to God, which we've talked about before. So, and also notice it ends on that dramatic note. It doesn't end on the note saying, well, everything's going to be fine in the end. No, it doesn't. Oh, everything's going to be absolutely great. Don't be frightened. No, in the words of Arnold Schwarzenegger, be afraid, be very afraid. Woe betide us, should we hear those words. Never shall they enter my rest. Incidentally, looking ahead, and no doubt about 300 steps ahead, and it's walking towards the Bible, we'll come up against the psalm again, where it's part of the discussion in the book, the letter of the Hebrews. Hope you've enjoyed that. All the very best. See you again soon. Bye.